I think we've had similar experiences with Bob Dylan.
Oh, really?
Oh, really? Yeah. So I sang, it must have been 3rd, 4th grade. We learned Blowing in the Wind in music class.
Well, see, that was my introduction to Bob Dylan as well at primary schools. One of the teachers taught us to sing Blowing in the Wind for a school assembly.
Perfect song for kids. It's perfect. I loved it.
Well, I mean, maybe it's a perfect song for kids, but when I was a kid, I didn't get it at all. I remember at the time thinking, but what's Blowing in the Wind? I don't get it. Does it just mean it's too windy for you to hear the answers to the questions?
Yeah.
What are these roads the guy is supposed to walk down? I don't get any of this. It probably wasn't helped by the fact that it was like 30 kind of truculent, reluctant school children who were all mumbling the words. And it was all kind of, I walk down.
But is Dylan the same sort of a icon in the UK that he is in the United States?
I would say no.
Yeah.
But only from my personal experience, because I, like you, and I don't get to say this about very much, but I am too young for Bob Dylan. So, like, when I was starting to understand what music was, Bob Dylan had already kind of come and gone and was sort of yesterday's man.
He lives across this massive breadth of time at this point. You know?
I thought you were going to say across the road from me.
I wish.
That's what I thought you were going to say.
I'm looking across the street and I don't see him, but I don't think you could see Bob Dylan in his own neighborhood.
Has he taken the milk in? Do you think he's all right?
I doubt he leaves the house anymore. But yeah, I mean, he's been doing it for 60-something years, so he's got a very, very long career. So there aren't that many people alive now who can say, I didn't live in the times of Bob Dylan.
What I didn't realise until this week was that, in the 60s, Bob Dylan was like Prince was in the 1980s, insofar as he'd written everybody else's songs.
Yeah.
I didn't realise until this week that All Along the Watchtower was written by Bob Dylan.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Or Knock, Knock, Knocking on Heaven's Door. I just assumed that those songs were by the original artists, and they were not. They're all his.
What, you thought Knocking on Heaven's Door was by Guns N' Roses, of course.
Well, and then Bob Dylan covered it.
It was a prequel cover. He went back in time to cover it.
And his unforgettable cover of Welcome to the Jungle on the B-side, yes. I can't believe we're doing a podcast about a 60s musician and we're making gags about 80s musicians. Please keep the jokes to the 21st century if you can.
Welcome, everyone, to the 2 Reels of Bob Dylan Cinema Club. My name's Andres Lorente.
And I am James Rosica. And as you have just suggested, this week we have watched a musical biopic directed by James Mangold, which is not Walk the Line. We've seen a film about a major American star of popular music from the 1960s. But it's not Walk the Line. We've seen a film this week about a troubled singer who can't cope with fame, and he's not good to the women in his life. But it's not Walk the Line. We've seen a film that has Johnny Cash as a central figure, but it's not Walk the Line. Ooh. We've watched A Complete Unknown, the new James Mangold Bob Dylan biopic with Timothée Chalamet. I was told off over dinner for mispronouncing Timothée Chalamet's name. Apparently it's Timothée Chalamet.
Is it?
And then we had a long conversation about rhyming names and why that's a bad idea.
But you should have had a movement at the dinner table to have everyone go back and rejig their names so that they rhymed. Zika.
Yeah, nothing rhymes with that. There is no hope.
End of conversation then. Very short one.
It's nice to see Timothée Chalamet. I'm gonna mess it up for the whole podcast.
Timothée Chalamet.
Timothée Chalamet. But it's nice to see him not fighting giant sandworms. That's good.
Oof.
At least. I am sort of taking the mick, but actually, the take home from this first section of the podcast should be the first film is good. It's pretty good, isn't it? I enjoyed this week's film.
Oh boy, are we that harsh, huh? I think it's better than good. I'm super biased on this one, but I think this is a great film. I loved it.
Well, you're taking the lead on this one.
I guess so. Maybe that means we don't even need to talk about it. People should just go see it.
Just go and see it. Put your phone down right now and head to the cinema.
Absolutely. Everyone's got their phones up all the time.
Well, at the risk of spoiling people's enjoyment of the film, which they are inevitably definitely going to see after they listen to the podcast, do you want to tell us what the story is?
I will. I'll tell you bits and pieces, but there's a lot of stories, so I'm not sure what's true and what's not. That's what makes it a great experience, I think. But this film, suddenly I have this hankering to see Walk the Line. Why is that? What have you done to us? This film opens on a Woody Guthrie song. It's playing in I don't know if it's a cab or a station wagon. Year's 1961, and Bob Dylan's sort of looking backwards out of a car, rear windshield or windscreen, depending on where you are, that crosses a bridge into New York City and delivers him to a fate in Greenwich Village.
I'm going to stop you there because opening image. Which we always talk about.
Yep.
Opening image is Bob Dylan crossing a river. And I think that is kind of the theme of the whole film, isn't it?
To a certain extent, yeah.
But anyway, right, continue.
Yeah.
Continue.
I also like the looking backwards because the closing image is kind of the opposite. The opening image, he's being transported somewhere and looking backwards, and the closing image is he has his own form of transportation looking forward. But
oh, good, yes.
I hate to get too, analytical about these silly metaphoric images, but
that is our job.
It is our job. Pete Seeger is on trial for leftist activities, and he's singing provocative songs, and then more Woody Guthrie emerges. So Woody Guthrie is a stone. He's a touching stone in this film. He emerges when Seeger sings Woody's "This Land Is Your Land" on the courthouse steps to his adoring fans. Then Bobby goes to visit Woody Guthrie, who's in a hospital suffering from Huntington's disease. And Pete Seeger is there by his bedside. Dylan sings for Woody. He's got a song for Woody. And the older men are amazed. I mean, Woody Guthrie's sort of incapable of really speaking much at this point. He's very ill in bed, but he loves Bob's music. Bob ends up staying with Pete and his family in the countryside outside New York City. And then Seeger sort of introduces Dylan to the New York City folk scene. There's a club scene where Joan Baez has just raptured the crowd. And then Dylan comes on, and he too is very impressed, so much so that he tells the crowd she's pretty and sings pretty, but maybe too pretty.
Too pretty.
And Joan Baez is not happy about that. But then she, like the rest of the audience that night, is impressed by Dylan, as is the entire crowd and the hit-making agents and producers who are there scouting Baez. Dylan goes on to play absolutely everywhere, including churches, where he encounters Alan Lomax, played by friend of the pod, Norbert Leo Butz. Lomax is responsible for archiving live.
Wait a second, is that guy a friend of the pod?
He's a friend of me.
Is he?
Way back when. Yeah.
And you are so well connected. I often forget that. You are so well connected.
Haven't heard from Norbert in years, but it's great to see him. He's great. And as Alan Lomax, he's great. And Alan Lomax is this... I don't know if he's self-appointed, but he's responsible for archiving live acoustic performances of the American folk scene and preserving its purity. At that church, Dylan meets Sylvie Russo. They have a relationship. She goes on a 3-month trip to Europe, so she's gone, and he hangs out in her apartment. And by this point, their relationship has sort of entered a fragile stage because Dylan's just his impending notoriety is driving them apart. And the theme here is really clearly stated, which I like about this film. People change. Transition is important. And there's even related talk of past musicians and their changes. While Dylan's hanging out in her apartment, the Cuban Missile Crisis emerges and people just go nuts. Joan Baez and Bob Dylan sort of hook up at a coffee house where he's just played Masters of War. While the city of New York is just going nuts. They have a night together, and despite some creative sparring, they sing "Blowin' in the Wind" together. Hey, just like you and I, in different
when
years,
we were kids,
on different continents, we sang "Blowing in the Wind" together. However, Joan Baez makes it beautiful. But will Baez make the rest of his life beautiful? Will Bob go electric at the staid Newport Folk Festival despite protestations of Pete Seeger and Alan Lomax? Will Dylan find answers blowing in the wind Does he want answers, or does the wind blow both fact and fiction and very few concrete answers? Answer. Don't think twice. It's all right. And more. This film is definitely more than all right. Any initial thoughts before we ring spoiler bells?
I take to be the Debbie Downer of the podcast. I really enjoyed this film. I'm not sure I enjoyed it quite as much as you did.
That's impossible.
What I wrote in my notes here, I just wrote, and this comes out like a much worse pun than it was in my head before I wrote it down. This film sings when Dylan picks up a guitar.
Yeah.
But it goes a bit flat when he puts it down.
Oh.
But happily, he does spend a lot of the running time singing and playing.
There's a lot, yeah.
The songs in this film are absolutely where it takes off.
Yeah.
And I could quite happily have watched 4 hours of Timothy Chalamet pretending to be Bob Dylan and singing. And anyway, I think he carries it off very well. He's got the hair. He's got that kind of lanky, thin, boyish figure. He's a little bit better looking than Bob Dylan, but I think he makes a very good fist of the performance here. Very watchable, and especially just enjoying the songs. I absolutely loved it. Outside of the songs, I mean, I think you're right. I've written a little note here that this is not a documentary. Truthfulness is kind of not relevant.
Yeah.
And so, I didn't necessarily go in expecting to learn a great deal about what really happened so much as just another retelling of a self-mythologizing man.
Yeah.
But outside of these incredible, fantastic songs, I think it's a slightly well-trodden story of, the tortured artist. So, all those bits are good. I thought the tortured artist bits maybe weren't actually quite as good as Walk the Line, which has a very similar shape. But no songs like Dylan's songs. Those are fantastic. That I loved.
Suddenly I want to see Walk the Line again. What's happening? I feel like this podcast is being co-opted by naysayers. I probably said this in the opening. I have a massive bias. I'm a huge Bob Dylan fan. I sort of grew up with a poster of him in my room from age 10 on or something like that.
Whoa.
So enormous fan. I agree with you on the music. It's amazing that Timothy Chalamet and Margaret Barbaro, I forget who the other...
Monica Barbaro.
They're fantastic, and they re-recorded all that music. So that is their own performance in every moment that Dylan sings or Joan Baez sings or the two of them sing together. So I agree with you wholeheartedly that I think the music is great. The songs are great. To hear them, I saw this on the big screen, very loud, and it was just fantastic. So under just ideal conditions again. I did see it about almost 4 weeks ago now. So I've been listening to nothing but Bob Dylan for about 4 weeks, I'd say. And I keep thinking about it. I really liked it. So I think I think one of the appeals is that it's not a straight biopic. It doesn't follow his entire career. It really focuses on these 4 or 5 years where he's really just getting started. And he is, for a short time, he's a complete unknown. It's true, but we still don't learn a whole lot about him. And that's the beautiful mystery of the film, I think. I thought performances were great, though. I thought Edward Norton was fantastic as Pete Seymour.
Yes, he is great.
There was no acting that was off or incomplete or insufficient anyway. It was all great acting. I'm still really impressed by the musicianship and the singing. We've had our discussions recently about, did that person really play that instrument in that movie? And there's no question here. And I love the idea of Timothée Chalamet doing Dune. He was making Dune when he was learning this part and learning guitar, and that's how far back the project goes. So on that Dune set, he was actually, maybe that's why Dune's not so good, because he was really focusing on the Dylan film, which is a better choice for him anyway. So
it's very hard to tune a guitar when you're dressed in a still suit. You can barely move your arms, I'm sure. So one of the things that really appeals to me from this film is, I think, the story world. It's beautifully realized. It looks great. Yeah. But especially during the first half of the movie, basically James Mangold kept showing me places that I would love to be in.
Yeah.
Like just like the East Village in the 1960s.
Yeah.
There's a scene sort of fairly early on where Dylan and Sylvie go to a Chinese restaurant with this big kind of circular table around the chef in the middle of the room. And I just really want it's a bit sort of grungy and a bit down at heel and a little bit dirty, and you could smell how tasty the food was. I really wanted to go to that restaurant.
Yeah.
And then later on, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the folk bar that he's playing, it has this little notice on the wall that says "dramatic readings every Tuesday night," something like that. I would love to have a folk bar in walking distance of my smart Manhattan apartment that has dramatic readings every Tuesday night. Oh my God!
Yeah.
So it was a lovely bit of fantastical tourism.
Yeah.
Especially the first half of this film. I would have loved to have gone to those places.
Yeah.
And part of the reason why we go to the movies is to go to places that we cannot go to, or go to places that do not exist or don't exist anymore. I wish that were my neighborhood. It seems wonderfully romantic. And beyond that, the clothes, the attention to detail, the capturing of that early 60s vibe is pretty immaculate. It's been tremendously well done. It's authentic while at the same time slightly amplified in that kind of cinematic manner.
Yeah.
So it's slightly hyper real in the way that a dream or a memory is, which is exactly the tone I think that makes a film like this a success.
Yeah, great story world. Ultimately, a love letter to New York City in the early '60s, I would say, and to a lesser extent Newport and the folk festival there. Yeah, gorgeous. I loved all the Greenwich Village stuff is great. The apartments are fantastic. The streets with the old school aluminum garbage cans. I mean, those kinds of details are just fantastic. And there's because it covers 4 or 5 years, there are some, there's a little bit of a character arc for the city itself, I suppose, too, in terms of the cars that are going by and how it grows a little bit more chaotic. But it's amazing that they captured New York City so well. You definitely feel like you're in the city. I think you're in the story world, which was a great tip of the hat to the filmmakers, because you definitely felt real, even if the story is not always real.
But talking of the story, then, so I mean, maybe this can segue into my very small Debbie Downer complaints about the film, which is that beyond these incredible songs, we have this story about Dylan, who starts out being a little bit wide-eyed and naive, and pretty idealistic and pretty driven, but as he becomes successful, it becomes more stressful for him. And I must say, I came away at the end feeling like the stakes weren't particularly high, I think, for Bob Dylan, insofar as I got to the end of the movie and thought, I wasn't entirely sure what he had to sacrifice or what he had to lose. Like a few people shout at him for playing electric guitar, and his old lovely, lovely friend, Pete Seeger, who's always very kind to him, is a bit disappointed. But the whole thing is pretty low stakes, and especially given that we in the audience know that Bob Dylan went on to have tremendous, incredible success, is a household name, won the Nobel Prize. So it's a little bit difficult to watch the film and feel particularly bad for him for any of it. It probably is stressful, isn't it, when people are banging on your taxi door window and holding little drawn portraits of you up against the doorway. But I came away feeling like it all came maybe a little bit more easily than I expected to for Bob. And maybe that's how it really worked. And there's no denying he's tremendously talented, and you didn't have to be a genius to spot that. But I felt like he didn't sacrifice a great deal. And what he did lose, because he lost Sylvie, he didn't seem tremendously upset about to me. It was all kind of handed to him a little bit on a plate, and which I felt then led to a little bit less tension and a little bit less uncertainty, a little bit less of a price to pay for what you gain, which means a little bit less dramatic in my eyes.
I think it's a complicated set of stakes, though. I think you have a great point. It's not as if he's broken a leg and he has to learn how to walk again or something like that. I think the stakes here are really existential, and I think that's harder to show cinematically, but I think they do a great job of it. And I guess my point would be this film is all about transition, change, and limitations that are imposed upon someone who has a very public, he struggles with the notoriety to this day, I think. He's not really happy about the fame, and then you're under this microscope when you want to make changes or you want to exceed someone's limitations that have been imposed upon you, that's difficult. So that's not cinematic stakes, I don't think. But I think, and for that reason, the music really helps, because the music is spelling out that, I think, existential struggle for him pretty well. So in terms of like really tangible stakes, you're right. It feels a little inflated when the Newport Folk Festival is a big deal, and oh my God, is he going to go electric? He'd already played electric. There's a band that was electric had preceded him, I think, on the stage.
Right.
Pete Seeger's actually much less, as I have read recently, he seemed much less worried about him going electric. He said that the sound quality was terrible, so what he was doing as electric was not coming off as good as it should have been. So I think those are the artificial stakes that I think a movie maker will probably raise in order to try and get more drama. But for me, it's much more of an existential struggle, and I think that's and I think it's done. We can talk about some of the moments that I think really underscore that, but I think that's done really well. And I think this film is laser focused on personal change, and I think that is the theme. And then sporadically, you get these fantastic musical moments which actually show that artistic change and that musical development. And I think that's why it's such a strong film.
As usual, you have watched and interpreted the film vastly more deeply than I have. My notes here, I wrote, the theme, success makes you an ass, is what I wrote. Because I felt like that was the underlying message that I took away from the film. Part of it is because the real Bob Dylan, I think, is not an easy character to like. He's a pretty tricksy, spiky, difficult person. And that certainly comes across on screen. Yeah. But people like that are hard to spend time with, either in the fictional world or in the real world. So maybe if you are spiky and difficult, you're asking quite a lot of the audience to really sympathise with you when you go through your journey. I
think the problem with your theme is that, and probably Bob Dylan would agree with me a little bit on this, hope he was already an ass. So it's not that the success made him an ass. It's that he was already an ass, then became a visible ass. But again, I love Bob Dylan, so I think he's cantankerous and difficult, and he's a trickster, and those are elements of his personality that have made him such a mystery and such a master at the same time. So. Wow.
Success amplifies your assness, you maybe. That's the real
If I were to revise your theme, I would just make that one little change, yeah.
There's one other note I wrote. So I really don't know Dylan very well at all. And like you, I thought I'd do a bit of homework. So I've been listening to Bob Dylan this week. Yeah. And it's been a bit of a musical revelation. I've spent most of the week looking at myself in the mirror saying, Bob Dylan, where have you been all my life? These songs are incredible. Yeah. I think the songs are absolutely amazing. But here's the catch, which is how brave do you have to be to decide to write a movie about someone who has won a Nobel Prize for their writing? That is a big ask. And I think in this picture, the structure is broadly sound, but the writing can't really match Dylan's. So you have these tremendously well-crafted, beautifully written, perfect songs. Yeah. And then in between, I found some of the writing a bit kind of on the nose. Towards the end of the movie, there's a scene where he and Johnny Cash are hanging out near the Newport Folk Festival, and Dylan tells him something like, I've got this gig coming up and I don't know if people are going to want to hear what I want to play. And it's all kind of, he's just repeating the same plot point for the benefit of those people who went out to the toilet during the previous 10 minutes. Yeah. It's pretty on the nose. There's he has this kind of cute date with Sylvie, and they have their kind of meet cute in a church. But then, there's like a 30-second scene where they walk along the street. She tells him what she does at the weekend. He asks her out. She rebuffs him. Then she gives him her phone number and explains where she'll be. It all happens in about sort of 30 seconds. It's very, very kind of, it feels very much like it's a scene about giving information rather than developing character. I think there are a few scenes like that are kind of a bit matter of fact, a bit explicatory, if there's a word, when the writing on the songs is so subtle. There's one other one I wrote in my list. After Dylan gets... But we haven't rang a spoiler bell. Should we ring a spoiler bell? Yeah, have we spoiled the film? Is it possible to spoil the film?
Yeah, it's just blow a little harmonica or something like that.
Okay. Well, I'll see if I can find a harmonica.
I've got a harmonica not far from my desk, but it's not right on my desk at the moment. So.
In the absence of a harmonica, I'm going to ring the spoiler bell.
Yeah, just do the old spoiler bell.
So imagine that was a harmonica. Imagine. Yeah. Okay. So like about halfway through the film, after Dylan, he goes out and he gets beaten up during a fracas in a bar. He goes to Sylvie's place to try and recover. And like she opens the door to him and she says, "We broke up, remember?" And it's like, and I sort of think, oh, that's one of those kind of really kind of crushing lines that sound so heavily written for the audience and not the people in the scene.
Yeah.
And I'm prepared to believe that maybe they did extensive testing and the audience didn't understand that they had broken up and they had to ADR a little dialogue in there. And maybe, I can't remember whether her back is to the camera or whether she's on screen when she says this. I mean, maybe not. Maybe it's something which has been inserted because test screenings showed that people didn't understand what had happened. But it just rang this very tiny little alarm bell in my head of this kind of quite on the nose writing.
Yeah.
But, oh man, it's like writing, how brave do you have to be to write a movie about Shakespeare? I feel this is in the same cubbyhole. Yeah, it's a brave writer who takes this on. The writer, incidentally, James Mangold himself, and Jay Cox, who's done a lot of work with Martin Scorsese. He wrote Gangs of New York, Age of Innocence, Last Temptation of Christ, these kind of Scorsese pictures. So I'm not saying he's a bad writer, but it didn't quite ring true. So
yeah, I think when compared to the excellence of the music, it's hard for the writing to stand up. I think that's what you're sort of saying, right?
Excellent. This is why you're a better writer than me, because you've just summarized in 6 words what I took 15 minutes to say. Yes, exactly.
But I think there's a lot of context too on that. The scene where you're talking about when he goes to Sylvia's apartment, that's quite a night because he's under the microscope. He's at this party where everyone wants to hear, the hit songs or whatnot, and he plays with Pete Seeger at this party, and then he meets Newmark in the elevator on that night. Then he goes to hear Newmark's playing in a band somewhere else at a pub, right? And that's where he gets punched. And then he goes to the hotel. So it's this crazy night where, he feels like, and he was with a woman. He broke up with someone else on that very night, right?
Oh, yes, yeah.
So there's a lot that's happening. And then to me, it does make sense that he goes there. And it almost makes sense that she would say something like that. Because if she's a scorned lover, but then she might say something like that. It is kind of a cheap line. But she says something, he's looking for some kind of validation or insight into his own world, because I think he's really wrestling with that. And she says this one thing to him. She says, they wonder why the songs don't come to them. Like other people are jealous of him or just curious about him, and they want to know why they don't come to why they don't come to the others. Why do they come to you? It's like, why you? And it's this wonderful, when you think about getting punched at a bar by someone and then going to an ex who's going to spurn you as well. It's like, it's a pretty grim moment for him, I think. And then she's got a boyfriend maybe or someone in the bedroom who's groaning. So now he knows that she's with someone else. I mean, it's quite a deflation that whole evening. So it's an interesting moment. And, so I don't think it might not be a great line. It might not be, again, this is probably completely fictional, right? I'm sure this did not happen, but Dylan did look at the script. Dylan even did a reading with James Mangold and others. So he approved it. He liked it. And I think he, knew Timothée Chalamet was going to be doing it and was pleased with the choice. So, and Chalamet does a great job. He really does.
He does.
So there are the women things. Like we see at least 3 girlfriends or partners in this film, and Joan Baez is coming in and out, and they hook up again at the Chelsea Hotel right before they're supposed to tour together, and she kicks him out again. And then one of the next scenes is when they're singing "All I Want to Do Is Baby Be Friends with You," which is a great moment. And all of those duet moments are phenomenal. I think I don't listen to a lot of Joan Baez. I did go back and listen to some Joan Baez. I don't really enjoy her music, but what she does, or what Monica does to her music and her contribution to Dylan in this film is unbelievable. And again, you're right. You're absolutely right. Those moments stand out so much. If you want to go see it, it's better than I've seen Dylan a number of times. He's terrible. God, I hope he's not listening. Very mercurial. He can be I've never heard him say a word to the audience. I've never heard him say good evening or thank you. And some nights he just stops playing songs if they're not going well. And all of a sudden you are going to an hour-and-a-half concert and it's 45 minutes. I've been to one of those. Whoa. I've been to some other nights where he was brilliant. So he's just very inconsistent. So to actually be able to see these guys really recreate the performances. I've seen some documentary footage, and we'll talk about that when we get to the next film, but where he was great. But he's really changed over the years, and I think he's become very isolated. And the funny thing is he loves touring. It's not like he's putting on great shows night after night, but he just tours. I just wonder if he has anything else going on at this point. He's been touring almost nonstop for 50 years or something like that. So it's odd that he loves performing so much when he's not fan friendly, let's say.
See, it sounds like he hates touring, but he's continuing to do it. I think if you stopped 20 people in the street and asked them, tell me a Bob Dylan fact, probably 10 of them wouldn't have anything for you. But the other 10, pretty much all of them would be able to say, oh, yeah, he started out playing folk, and then when he went electric, a whole bunch of people got very cheesed off and shouted Judas at him from the audience.
That's right.
So this is like the one best known fact that most people can quote about his career, and maybe that is the obvious focal point around which to write a story, for a biopic. So maybe they've chosen the low hanging fruit. They've chosen the most obvious thing. Yeah.
And I think that's a wise choice, because with a 60+ year career, I think you've got to focus on one thing. And that's actually one thing that I really enjoyed about this film. I love the fact that it focused on just 4 years. They're pretty consequential years in his career. They seem pretty honest years too. I love the point where Dylan, he walks off stage when he's playing with Joan Baez at one point. She just starts singing one of his songs without him. I love the moment where he arrives at Newport and they're going to sing, what is it? It Ain't Me, Babe, I think. And before he comes on stage, she's performing alone. And she gives him the finger from the stage. It's a wonderful moment. So I think there's a lot of honesty in here. And obviously, again, he signed off on this production. So I like that part about it, that I think he is honest, even if the film and even Dylan himself are not always honest.
But it does strike me that it's a little bit like making a film about Neil Armstrong. And you're going to make a biopic of Neil Armstrong, and you spend an awful lot of the film debating, are people going to go to the moon? Will there possibly be a moon landing? Who can tell? There probably won't be, but maybe there will be. And everybody in the audience knows that he went to the moon. So this is the wrong thing to act as a bit of suspense. And in the same way, I think the whole second half of the film is building up to this supposedly pivotal, monumental moment when he picks up an electric guitar. I sort of feel like most the people watching the movie with me, know what's going to happen, and they will know what's going to happen well enough that it doesn't justify dominating the second half of the picture. I do understand why it's it's an important pivotal moment, and I do appreciate that it didn't happen like that. I love this notion of people not knowing whether he's going to play amplified instruments or not. With the idea, and then when he does start playing amplified instruments, there's amps and there's an organ, and there's all these enormous instruments which couldn't possibly appear from nowhere. You need, you need a week's notice to ship all those onto the. It's not, it's not a mystery thing that you've whipped out from your back pocket. So that whole thing kind of doesn't quite work, and I'm aware that he was playing these acoustic and electric sort of double sets. For a long time before the Newport. Folk festival appearance. So it feels a little bit artificial. I wonder whether this will he, won't he sort of theme is overly dominant, when I would personally probably prefer to see a little bit more detail of other bits of his life. But I mean, I'm being churlish here. I really enjoyed this film. I had a great time watching this, and at the end I turned to Rachel and said, that was great. So what more can you ask for?
I think that the moments that you're critiquing are ripe for critique. So I don't disagree with you at all, because that's one of my biggest complaints with biopics in general, is that if you know anything about the person, there aren't going to be many surprises. So for me, again, no surprises in this film, but it's the deviations from reality that kind of make it interesting, I think. And I'll point to one, is that, and it's one of my. When I first saw it, I didn't like this scene, but it's the Johnny Cash scene. I think you've alluded to it, where he and Johnny Cash apparently were writing back and forth a little bit, and Johnny was encouraging him to track some mud on the carpet, as he says, raise some hell and do what you want to do. When he went electric, Johnny Cash was not at Newport. I think they met at the Newport Folk Festival the year before. So it's actually not a true scene by any means. But there's a scene where Dylan wants to get away on his motorbike and on his motorcycle, and he's sort of been blocked in, and Cash just happens to come out and tries to move his car, but to liberate Bob Dylan. I mean, it's very obvious symbolism there, but it's wonderful. He ends up destroying these 2 other cars with his big ass car, and he's inebriated, I think, and he's not even going anywhere because he just kind of eventually turns off his car and leaves it where it is. But sure enough, Dylan can get his motorcycle out. So it's kind of very much on the nose, but it's a great scene of, again, giving someone the artistic space, the artistic license to go do what they want to do. And it's followed up not long after that when I think they do 2, or they do Maggie's Farm, a couple songs, maybe like a Rolling Stone before leaving the stage. They've done this electric set. Yep. And there's this moment where Johnny Cash, all he's doing is holding out an acoustic guitar for Bob to go back on stage and do It's All Over Now, Baby Blue. And it's wonderful that Johnny was like, yes, go do your thing. But then when the crowd's kind of booing and they haven't had enough, he doesn't say anything to him. He's just holding the acoustic, and Bob goes and grabs it and plays. And I think it's just, those are really quite visual scenes, and they're fantastic. They're not true. It's absolute bullcrap, but I loved it. And the songs were great on either side. The electric tunes were pretty good, I thought, even though they intentionally made the sound weak. And also you've got this fake drama you're right about Alan Lomax and Pete Seeger either trying to cut the electricity off or stop the show, even though that's not what happened historically. So I agree with you. I think the stakes of the drama, it's not really that tense, and it's not very real at all, but still makes a good story. I think it ends well too. It's so Bob gets sort of back on his motorcycle.
Yep.
He's loud and rumbling and trying to leave Newport and head into the next stage of his life. There's this great moment where his motorcycle is making noise and comes back up on the sort of the site of the festival, and there are people picking up trash and stuff, and Pete Seeger hears him, and Pete Seeger's just the good guy. He's helping
putting away the chairs.
Yes, he's putting away chairs. He's picking up trash, and he sees Bobby in his glasses, and it's kind of a goodbye to the old Dylan, and he rides back to visit Woody, and he's going to keep Woody's harmonica, even though he tries to offer it back to Woody, and he's going to carry on this tradition and to a new place. And then all of a sudden we start hearing another Woody song, So Long It's Been Good to Know You. And I think a good bookends both on the Woody songs and on the images. He drives away on his motorcycle, looking forward down the road and into the future. And I think it's very good contrast from the beginning where he was being delivered somewhere and looking backwards to the past. And now he's looking into the future.
God, yep. I mean, that's craft, isn't it?
That's craft, yeah.
That's craft. In the same way with those Johnny Cash moments, it's that classic. That's good screenwriting of character expressed through action, isn't it? That's exactly what it is. I am wrong to complain. There are a lot of great moments in this. I'm just being
I don't think you're wrong to complain. I think I am intentionally blindfolding myself to some of the weaknesses, because in other parts I just thought, I did write this in my notes, I think this is a film that doesn't really make many missteps. I think there are some weak moments, but I don't think there are any glaring holes or glaring accidents.
No.
And I think that's important. I love the final image, too, because allegedly Bob Dylan got in quite a motorcycle accident, which took him out of the public eye and out of music for a little while.
Shortly after the events of this film, I think, wasn't it?
And I think it's a lie. I was reading this weekend, there's no evidence, apparently there are no hospital records of him going anywhere, and it's possible that he just decided to take a little vacation away from the public, away from fame. So, I mean, it's another one of these Bob kind of myths that's just out there, and I think he did the same with the Scorsese documentary a couple of years ago. Sharon Stone's in there, having known him as a teenager, and that never happened. She would have been too young, but she's on camera talking about how she met him backstage one night. So, I mean, there's just the mystique of Bob Dylan. He's the first one to really play it up and play into it and create it. So I was thinking, oh my God, are we going to end on the motorcycle accident and then there's going to be a sequel? I'm glad there wasn't. So I'm definitely biased. I love the film. I think it's all about Dylan. Is he going to be allowed to be Dylan? I think, and that's when I was talking about the existential thing before. I think that's it. The stakes for me aren't, is he going to play electric or not? You're right that those are the stakes in the film. But I think the subtext is Dylan going to be allowed to be Dylan? It's not that, is he going to be allowed to play electric? So I think that's the real moment. That's the real story behind the story. And I think that's hard to show, but I think they do a pretty good job of it.
But then there is no one Dylan, is there?
No.
I mean, he's had like a whole bunch of pseudonyms, and he's done all sorts of different work, and he's veered between genres and forms.
Yeah.
There is no one Dylan.
No, and I've been listening to nothing but Dylan for weeks now, and there's some 80s and 90s records that are just not so good. But again, man has hundreds of great songs and dozens of great records. So, but the thing is, he's done gospel, he's done like absolute like Christian music, he's got country music in there. He's done films, he's written some films, he's definitely scored some films. So, I mean, he's not held back by some sort of limitations that people are going to put on him, and I think that's the story right there.
Good for him. More Dylan in a minute, but in the meantime, I reckon it's probably too late to phone the police about Bob Dylan's possibly fraudulent motorcycle accident.
Ooh.
But I would still be inclined to drop a dime to the other police squad that we regularly call. I'm going to put in a call to the Cliche Squad.
Cliche Squad.
Because real life is the biggest cliche of all.
For all that I've introduced the Cliche Squad, I've only got one cliche on my list this week. I'm sure there were a whole bunch of others, and you're usually much more perceptive about these than I am. There was one that stood out to me a little bit, which is quite early on in the movie, when Pete Seeger is giving Bob Dylan a lift back from the hospital when they've visited Woody Guthrie, and he turns on the radio, and it's that thing about any time anyone ever turns on the radio in a movie, there must immediately be something which is relevant to the theme of the film on the radio.
Yes.
And so he turns the radio on, and there's immediately a news report about Vietnam protests. I think that's and then that never ever happens in real life, when it always happens in films. That's kind of stood out to me a bit. But I don't know whether did you spot any other cliches this week?
Well, I'm glad you caught that one, because 1961 is pretty early for action in Vietnam, or at least the awareness of what was going on in Vietnam. So it's a little out of context. Mine, it's funny because I have this cliche and I wrote it down before I watched Don't Look Back, so it's almost invalidated by Don't Look Back. Mine was executives with eccentric smoking habits. Alan Grossman is constantly smoking. He's got these smoking, those little holders and things like that, and people are smoking cigars everywhere. It always seems like you know someone who's got money and power, and they're influential in their industry if they have eccentric or maybe excessive smoking habits. But then in Don't Look Back, boy, and we can talk about how real that film is too, but Alan Grossman's smoking a lot in that film. There are a lot of people smoking a lot in that one. So.
There are a lot of people smoking in both of these films, really.
The good old days. There was smoking in lots of films back in the 40s, 50s, 60s. It was an advertisement for the cigarette industry. So but that's it. Those aren't bad cliches, I guess.
Poor Philip Morris. Eh?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, overall,
I think see it, hear it. I think I'm getting that even from you. Yeah.
See it. A complete unknown. It's on the buses at the moment, all over London currently, and you could do a lot worse. James Mangold's bounced back from Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny.
Oh God.
And made this, which is a thoroughly enjoyable, finely crafted film. It's not perfect, but what is? Yeah. I think it's for all my snidey comments, this is a pretty terrific film, and I enjoyed every minute. And
that's an impressive bounce back too. So here to you, here's to you, James Mangold.
That is quite a bounce back. Right. Well, shall we have a break?
Yes.
And then we will come back and we'll look back at another Dylan film. This time, the real Dylan in Don't Look Back.
No, we can't look back. It says Don't Look Back.
Oh no, I've done it wrong. This episode of the Two Real Cinema Club is sponsored by Moneytizer.
Ooh.
Friends are the most important things in life. Friends will stand by you. Friends will see you through the good times and the bads. And we all know that you can't buy friends. But what if there were a way to turn the power and the wonder of friendship into money? Well, the new app Moneytizer can help you do exactly that. Are you spending the evening with your friends? Well, make sure that your friends know your time isn't free. Spending time is going to mean spending money from now on. And if they don't want to pay, what kind of friend are they? Perhaps your friend needs a lift somewhere. Don't be their free Uber driver. Charge them per mile. Maybe your friends like to chat on the phone. Do they send dozens of texts? Do they like going out for a drink? Well, they really should be paying for the refreshments and your conversation. Your time is worth money, and Moneytizer will help you set a rate for all of it. If you're good at something, we think you should never do it for free. And you are an exceptionally good friend. So get Moneytizer and turn friendship into cash. Plus, as a new service, do your friends need money or investment advice? We'll help you to set up your very own borderline fraudulent meme-based crypto coin, so you can flog it to your friends. No SEC regulation to slow things down. Just because they're your friends doesn't mean they aren't also suckers. So get Moneytizer, because a good friendship is an investment and we'll help you to cash out.
Oh, I need more friends. I really need more friends.
And we are back. I feel like we shouldn't be back because we've been told not to look back, but we are back.
It's funny. The last couple years, 2 years ago, we were told not to look up. Right? Wasn't there a film called "Don't Look Up"? Or Don't Look
now we can't look back. What the hell are we supposed to do?
I have agency. I can do what I want with my eyes.
You see, but that's just what they want you to think.
Yeah.
We have also watched another Bob Dylan film this week. So we've watched 1967's Bob Dylan : Don't Look Back, which is a black and white documentary by D.A. Pennebaker. Is it Pennebaker? Pennebaker?
I think it's Pennebaker. Yeah,
Pennebaker. Who has made, like basically off the back of this, all of the big rock documentaries from the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. He's made Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, Otis Redding documentary, Depeche Mode live, Alice Cooper live, Little Richard live. I mean, all these big names. I think he largely got all of those gigs by making this, which is a film about Bob Dylan in the UK. But before we talk about it, we always got to have to ask the question.
Yeah.
You chose this one.
Oh.
How come?
Do you have any other questions for me, Counsel?
Oh boy. I thought it would be good to see a document. I'm going to put that in quotation marks. I'm sorry. A documentary film with Bob Dylan that might be just as fictional as A Complete Unknown is. I don't know. I don't know if there's any difference in terms of what's real and what's not between the two films. So I'm looking forward to discuss it. I saw this. I think I've seen it twice. A long time ago when I was a much younger man, probably more willing to swallow and believe everything that Bob Dylan said and did. And now to come back to it, especially after seeing this one, this A Complete Unknown, I think it has new context. And I looked at this film in a very different way. So it's good to see it. It's not that long. Was it an hour and a half or something like that?
Yeah.
And from D.A. Pennebaker is interesting. He made I think he made The War Room, too, which is a film about the Clinton cabinet. So, I mean, this guy has films that were probably spread 40, 50 years or something like that. So,
quite a career.
Yeah, and I don't know why he was invited to do this or chose to do it, and that's probably a story on its own, but I'm sure you read the book.
Well, I did read the book, but I'll tell you about that later. Yes, that's it. That's in my back pocket. I've been saving that one up. You've
oh, damn.
Spoiled my surprise.
I thought for sure you hadn't read anything. Jeez, some crow. Always reading stuff.
So Don't Look Back. So it's shot in April and May 1965.
Okay, yeah.
While Dylan was touring in Britain. It was only released in May 1967.
Yeah.
A lot happened in those 2 years.
Yeah.
You are right. It is available for free on YouTube if you want to watch it. But the YouTube version is missing the opening 3 minutes.
Oh.
So you have to watch those separately. So it opens with the pop video for Subterranean Homesick Blues.
Yeah.
So you have to watch that separately, and then you can watch the rest of the movie on YouTube. I'm very impressed that you've watched this twice.
Yeah.
I think I would be challenging myself
Yeah.
if I wanted to watch this film twice. I didn't find it an easy watch.
No,
but
no.
shall I tell you the story?
You should, because I think there is a story there.
Okay, take your word for it. So, Bob Dylan, Don't Look Back, is a shaky cam, black and white, cinema verite documentary about Bob Dylan. It's 1965. And after an opening that is more or less a pop video for Subterranean Homesick Blues with cards that have lyrics written on, Dylan arrives in the UK for a tour. We follow him and Joan Baez, his manager Albert Grossman, a whole bunch of other musicians as they have interviews, play gigs, ride in taxis, chat backstage, negotiate television appearances, and eventually, at the climax of the film, Dylan plays to 6,000 people at the Albert Hall.
Yeah.
And you notice I haven't put a question at the end of the synopsis.
I've got a question for you, though.
I'm all ears.
Wasn't he at the Albert Hall in the beginning, too? What was the first concert?
I think it opens with him sort of diddling about in the changing room at the Albert Hall, and then it closes with that same venue, I think.
Okay,
but I think that is just the magic of film editing.
Ooh, yeah.
So I think he tours the north of the country first. I think he goes to Liverpool and Manchester first, and then finishes off at the Albert Hall. But I could be wrong.
No, I think you get a teaser of the end of the film at the beginning. It's not so clear because it's a documentary, and then I think they come back. So I think the Albert Hall concert is the end, but what we see at the beginning is Albert Hall, and I say that in part because of the review that a news reporter or an art critic calls in, and I thought he said Albert Hall to fill the Albert. Yeah. So where do we begin? If you're allowed to look back, do you look back to begin or do you look ahead to begin? I don't even know where to go.
I was trying to figure out how I would explain what this film is to somebody who hasn't seen it, and I think basically this film is like going to a teenage party or kind of an early 20-somethings party as the designated driver. So like you turn up and everybody else is kind of drunk and sort of off their face, and you sit on the sofa and you have to be kind of sensible and you're just watching all your friends have these idiotic conversations, and then somebody gets into an argument about who threw a glass and there's a bit of argy-bargy.
Yes.
And then one of the neighbours comes in to complain about the noise. And someone's dad comes and tells them to F off, and you're thinking, oh God, Nathan's dad is telling the neighbour to F off. It's so embarrassing. Oh no. And he thinks he's so cool. Oh no, am I the only sober person in the building? I guess I am.
There's a lot of bad adult behavior in the film. I think the older people are worse than even the younger people. It's it's called Don't Look Back, and that's taken from a lyric. I think that's in Subterranean Homesick Blues, but I don't know that it really suits the film, I guess, unless it's like this is a part of Dylan not to look back on, and that's why they're saying don't look back. I mean, this is the past Bob Dylan, and by 67 he's changing, he's doing different music. It's a peculiar title in some ways, but this is I enjoy it. I think similarly, I don't want to we can synthesize later, I guess, but I mean, again, the music kind of is represents the high points, I think.
Yes.
In the film, there's this cameo, Allen Ginsberg in the opening scene that you're talking about. He's in the background. He's dressed as some sort of Hasidic scholar or a rabbi or something, and it's just very bizarre. It's like a road construction scene, and he's just talking to some other guy while Dylan's flashing all the cards. And the card scene always amazes me.
It's just around the back of the Savoy Hotel, apparently.
Oh, is that okay?
Yeah. That
card scene always amazes me because there must have been 100 or more of these cards, and he's holding them in one hand and pulling them down, and it's just it's amazing how he's a strong guy, that Bob Dylan. He had all those pieces of paper. But it's sort of like one of these things that has become a meme, and it's been done again and again. I mean, even
it has, hasn't it?
Love Actually sort of has that moment, doesn't it, too? So, wonderful thing. I think of this film. I think about the Beatles for two reasons. This is almost like the Beatles in reverse. England going to America and experiencing the mania there, and I think Dylan's almost trying to maybe even hype up him going from the States to England and experiencing the same kind of mania. So it's his kind of Hard Day's Night film on a certain level.
Yep. Okay. Yes. Yep.
Not nearly as inventive and probably, I'll say, less fictional than A Hard Day's Night. But so I think there's a zeitgeist to this film. I think is that he probably felt like he needed to come out with a movie as well, because I think Hard Day's Night might be 1964 or something like that. And then this is, you're right. I keep thinking this is a 65 film, but it actually was shot then and then took a couple of years to be released. And I think, oh God, I don't want to, I'm sort of alluding to some synthesis stuff here, but the stakes here seem to be like on the Donovan front. Like we see Donovan's review in the newspaper or something like that, and Bob Dylan says, I'd like to meet Donovan. And, it's the kind of thing where you think, okay, they were always going to meet up at some point, and then they just turn it into this little fictional piece where pursuing Donovan becomes this thread, and they eventually do meet in a hotel, and it's one of the worst scenes for Bob Dylan, because he's yelling at managers, and he's drunk, and everyone else is drunk, and someone's throwing a glass out. We don't know that. We didn't see it, but allegedly someone threw a glass out a window, and Dylan's mad at the guy, and they have these drunken conversations that are not worth shooting whatever it was, 8mm, 16mm film. Minutes and minutes of two drunken guys yelling at each other, and you're running film? Oh my God. So this is before video. I mean, I think what you're looking at now is probably, mastered. It's probably a reprint to video that's been remastered, so it looks pretty good. But
if they made this film now, it would be a live stream, wouldn't it? It's like this great long kind of unfiltered, meandering, pointless, aimless conversations. Just kind of going on and on around the houses, and the same thing comes back up again, and people are slurring a bit now. It just I don't know. I found it quite hard to watch. And even the people who are like professional interviewers, so there are a bunch of proper journalists in the film, and even they seem excited to meet Dylan, but utterly unable to really get at the core of him or ask any genuinely interesting, clever, insightful questions.
Yeah.
In fact, I think if there is anybody who interviews Dylan at all well in the film, it's a bunch of Mancunian schoolgirls, or they might be Liverpudlian schoolgirls, but like just some schoolgirls early on in the movie. You get him to sign a record, and then they're chatting with him, and their conversation is honestly more enlightening, more human, more interesting than anything that the journalists come. They don't know what to ask Dylan, and they haven't figured him out.
And again, to me, that's felt a little bit like a setup. You've got this fairly good footage of them going down on the street, and I think maybe they saw the kids down there and they start interviewing, and then they bring them up. It's still setups. It's not. I don't think it's that organic. No. And I'm glad you talked about it like a live stream, because this is an early version of reality television. It's got these invasions of privacy into these really unremarkable moments. It's inventing reality. I think when you put a camera on people, they're acting. Regardless of whether it's a documentary, people are acting. And I think, it plays into Dylan's strengths really well. But it's also, I think he's intentionally obtuse in all the interviews, and he's just taking the piss out of all the interviewers. And I think it's all intentional. I'm not even sure any of those were real reviewers. I mean, there's this Time magazine editor or writer who's Bob is just totally annoying, and they're talking about what's true and what's not, and do you care about what you're saying and all that. I mean, it just seems like a setup as well.
But Bob Dylan is kind of being like a 1965 edgelord, isn't he? He's kind of, he reminds me of like the kids in school who used to spend all of their energy trying to derail the lesson. Yeah. Or when they would talk to an adult, they would kind of very cleverly turn around anything the adult said to mean the absolute opposite, and they feel very smug about themselves being so clever, outwitting an adult, when actually they just kind of a bit of a Burke. I read up a little bit about the Time correspondent. Good. He attempts to humiliate, I suppose. This guy's called Horace Freeland Judson. So he was correspondent for Time. He went on to become like I think a fairly well-respected science journalist. I think he was like a historian of molecular biology. Yeah. But in the 60s, so his gig for Time was culture and science. That's what he covered, which is what a gig that is. I was watching, like, after I read this, I was just imagining the the phone call from the editor where the guy's phoning him up and saying, Horace, yeah, we want you to cover some things for Time. Can you cover culture? Well, all of it. Yes, all culture. Yes, pop music. Yes, art. Yes, literature. Yes, opera. Yes, and dance, everything. Oh, and one more thing, Horace, you have to cover science as well. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, good luck.
But then I was kind of thinking, but this is the 60s. I bet in the 60s there were basically 5 Time journalists in Britain. There was one guy for science and culture, there was one guy for politics, and there were 3 who would cover the royal family, I bet. And then if the Queen did something interesting, they get a few more journalists to cover the royal family. I think that's Britain in the 1960s, isn't it?
I'm glad you did a little research on that, because that interview seems so pointless, and he seems like a science editor or science reporter covering culture, because it's not very great questioning, but also you're dealing with Bob Dylan, who's got his own agenda, I think, and this is a funny art like document, as a historical document, because this is about as public as Bob Dylan gets, I think. I mean, we don't see other documentaries where he's talking, as I said, as a public citizen. He's not that open, and I don't think he's very honest ever. So he doesn't do a ton of interviews anymore, I don't think. So I mean, this is kind of like this is a real public record of the person of Bob Dylan. There is that opening scene or early scene where another reporter is calling in. He's calling in this review, which also this one seems staged to me. He's calling in a review. He's just basically talking into the phone and reading his review of Bob Dylan's concert at Albert Hall. And he has this quote. He says, "The times are changing when a poet, not a pop singer, fills Albert Hall," which is very funny. I like that. But sadly, I think those times have changed back. I mean, you're not going to see a poet filling Albert Hall. Yeah,
oh my God. Yeah, can you imagine?
Which is kind of a rubbish place to hear music, by the way. I've been there a number of times for concerts, and it's too big and echoey, and it was not made for that. I think Albert Hall was made for livestock shows or something, right?
No, surely
I
not.
think it's an exposition kind of building. I think it was, you'd put it, I mean, I've seen tennis matches in there, which are kind of strange. I've seen ballet there. I've seen the orchestras there. I've seen some rock music there. It doesn't do any, it's a beautiful building.
It is a beautiful building.
It doesn't really do anything very well, I don't think. That's the funny thing.
I'm not sure that the Victorians had a very clear idea of what acoustics were.
No. Oh, God. Well, yeah. And there's no amplification then. Barely any electricity, I suppose, at that point. But so it's an interesting scene because, again, is this, I couldn't tell if that was real. I mean, obviously, the reporter's not cited as being from any newspaper or anything like that. And that's something you could easily stage. So you start to really question reality, I think, when you're watching this film. And even those altercations, why are they yelling at these hotel managers and hotel people? And there's nothing to, they're saying some really rude things. They're being very rude to people. And I wonder if, after the Pennybaker cuts the film and says, "Oh God, I'm sorry, man. I didn't mean to call you an idiot. It's just for the film, man. For the documentary.
Just for the show. Just for the show."
Or the extorting money from, like BBC, Albert Grossman smoking away.
Granada, and yes.
Good old Grossman. He's smoking lots of cigarettes and haggling with the BBC for a higher fee to do some sort of like half hour on air. And I looked it up. Tito Burns is the person who's like, he's the middleman. It's like he knows people. Yeah. And he's a jazz musician. Did you know this? He was a jazz musician in Britain. And I don't know that he would be there. It's almost as if they just got someone who was kind of known and then they put him in the setup. Again, it's all telephones. You're not hearing other voices, really. It could be very easily just made up.
So now that you say this feels like a very, very Bob Dylan way to make a documentary.
Yeah, exactly.
Quite possibly a lot of it is made up.
Yeah.
There's one other thing which really surprised me, which may not be so obvious to a North American viewer, I don't know, but my goodness, everyone in this film is so posh. People talk so posh.
Yeah.
I think the only people who don't sound like they work for BBC Radio 4 are the Manchester schoolgirls. Otherwise, everybody sounds, incredibly posh. No one talks like that now.
Yeah.
Even the King doesn't talk like that now.
Yeah.
Those voices have utterly disappeared from British culture. They do not exist.
Well, the times they are changing. I don't know that anyone's
that's good.
that articulate anymore. Yeah.
And frustratingly, you get to hear like a few songs towards the end of the movie, but almost all of them are cut short. You get one verse and then it kind of fades out and you go to the next one. Yeah. It's almost like it's a documentary made for people who want to learn about Dylan, but aren't prepared to sit through a song.
That's about it. Yeah. So it's and you know, obviously the sound quality isn't as good as the feature film that we just watched. So it is a letdown. But those are still sort of the high marks of the film, I think, are when he's doing stuff. And not electric. There's not this, you know, this drama about is he going to do electric or not. And he, you know, he would have played some electric shows by this point, but again, like Albert Hall's a strange place for a guy with a guitar and a harmonica to sing to 6,000 people or whatever it is. And or there's that wonderful scene, I think it's in Liverpool, where the PA system's not working well, and they're just sort of unplugging things and plugging things back in, and eventually he starts working again. And there's a Spinal Tap moment too. I think Spinal Tap is in This Is Spinal Tap. There's a scene of the band trying to find the stage. They just get lost and lost. And this is, I think, part of it. He's trying to get out of the building, I think, and then you're escaping these fans and this mania, and they sort of get lost in the bowels of some auditorium in Manchester or something like that. It's just. There are these wonderful scenes. I think it's not that interesting. You're right, and I think I don't know if it's intentional or not. It's like it's the opposite of Hitchcock, right? It's all the boring parts are put in, right? And I think I'm gonna talk about existentialism again, because I think there are these moments of waiting for something to happen backstage and stuff, even though there's always something kind of happening, even if it's people throwing glasses out of windows or typing on typewriters. You know, there's stuff happening. It's just not that interesting, and they're waiting for
just the most banal stuff.
Yeah. So we look back at all these. I found it odd to look back at something that's happened 60-something years ago with interest, even though it's all just nothing. And in fact, we do look back. We look back on life as being, you know, more interesting. I think as we are mental editors, ultimately. We really overlook a lot of the boring bits and make a film in our mind of what our memories actually are. And that's a good thing, because otherwise you get just long films with nothing happening. So,
well, talking about entertainment where nothing happens.
Yes.
So I did read the book this week. I did get No Direction Home by Robert Shelton. Which I said that is like the definitive biography of Bob Dylan, and it is 700 pages long. Ooh. So sorry, I had to take a reality check. And realized, I got through about 60 pages and realized, wait a second, I'm not going to finish this before Easter. So instead, I read Bob Dylan's own novel, Tarantula. Have you ever read this?
No.
So this is like his. Well, it's kind of published as a novel. It's like a sort of prose poem. It's only 149 pages long.
Doable.
Even better, with a very long introduction, which I just skim read. And the bits I read from the introduction were admirably honest, because the introduction is written by the publisher, and they say basically that we were persuaded to publish a book by Bob Dylan. We had no idea what it would look like, but we were pretty sure that it would look like money. So they just sort of agreed to publish something that Bob Dylan would send them.
Yeah.
So it's written in like 1965 and 1966, and it was kind of like available like on the as a kind of bootleg for about 5 years, which again is very, very Bob Dylan. There's no notion of a bootleg book to go with bootleg tapes. It wasn't officially published until 1971, and it's kind of a mess. It's certainly not a novel. The thing it reminded me of, there's a famous story about, and I might have told this story before, about Aphex Twin was he's commissioned to do a remix for Radiohead. I'm on safer pop music ground now. And he was asked to do this thing, got the money, and completely forgot about it. This is how the story goes. Until one day the courier turns up saying, I've turned up for the tape of that Radiohead remix. And so the Aphex Twin said, oh God, right, hold on, wait there. And he goes upstairs and he runs off a tape of whatever he happens to be working on that day and hands it over. And Radiohead take this tape and they say, oh great, and put it on a B-side. I think Tarantula kind of is about the same. It's like somebody offered Bob Dylan some money for a book, and he agreed, and then sort of forgot about it. And then someone turned up needing the manuscript, so he panicked and he handed like a notebook that he keeps by his bed, in which he would write like dreams and the occasional snatches of song lyrics and little jokes and things like that. And so he just handed them that, and then they published that. And worse than that, they dropped the book on the way to the publisher, and all the pages fell out and then got reassembled in a random order. So it's like, it's like it is as dense as poetry or song lyrics, but it's really completely shapeless. It's it's dreamlike. It's exhausting to read because like every word is equally important. So, like the critics will tell you, it's a response to James Joyce. And he keeps name checking the same people. He names checks Aretha Franklin a lot and E.E. Cummings a lot. There is a chapter called "Vandals Took the Handles." It's all full of little fragments of Bob Dylan songs, but kind of rearranged. And the other thing it reminded me of is Confederacy of Dunces, if you've ever read that. Because it is a kind of stream of consciousness, ground level look at the kind of detritus of 1960s American society. So it's all about kind of bums and drunks and people getting into fights and hanging out on street corners. At least kind of little tiny snippets, ideas that might possibly have become songs or might have been taken from songs. It's peculiar. You could take each page and rearrange it and it would make about as much sense. And I did get to the end of the book and I thought, well, that's 2 hours I'm never getting back. I don't know. I think Bob Dylan himself is even a bit embarrassed about it now. And frankly, I think probably he should be. But,
I have to say,
it's interesting. It's another side of the man.
You are disparaging a Nobel Prize laureate.
You are right. Who the hell am I? You are exactly right. I have nothing to counter him with. I take my hat off to him.
That one must have gotten by the committee. They probably didn't read that little bit. It can't all be good.
It can't all be good.
As you're saying that, I'm reminded of one of the great lines from the film. They applaud this kind of bullshit. Comes towards the end. I think they're in a cab leaving the Albert Hall gig or something like that, or that's what the setup looks like. And Grossman
that's
says,
what they should have called the film.
Yeah. Makes more sense, I guess. And Grossman says at one point, you were all there calling him an anarchist, offering no solutions. Like lines like that just sound like, again, sounds like it's written and fed to the person to say on camera or something. But
this is the same thing we said last week when we watched Beaverland, isn't it? What's the difference between a documentary and a fiction film? Nothing.
Joan Baez is in this film, and that's probably worth mentioning. Like, she's gone on this tour with him, and she doesn't do any shows with him, I don't think. I think they're just friendly at that time, and she's singing whenever he's typing in a hotel room or a backstage or whatnot. She's singing, and these hangers-on or hangers-arounders. I don't know how you would say that. These people just kind of part of his posse at the time, and a lot of entourage stuff. And the Donovan scene, of course, is one part of that. But not a lot happens. A lot of people, not a lot happens. A lot of smoking. Again, a lot of smoking, though.
A lot of smoking. Yeah. Yep. There are some themes coming out, aren't there? It seems incredible now that someone who makes their money largely from their voice is determined to smoke as many cigarettes as they can squeeze in 24 hours. Yep. Well, we've kind of alluded to the synthesis already. I can already feel you kind of champing at the bit. We should bring these two films together. They are not so very different. But before we do, I'm going to, as always, force you to play my favourite game. We'll have a quick round of Who Am I? Who am I?
I go first.
Oh, go ahead.
I am Bob Dylan.
This never happens.
I am Bob Dylan.
You're in the same way that you are Spartacus.
Yes. Everyone has to say I'm Bob Dylan. There aren't a lot of characters that otherwise have much time in either of these films, really. I'm going to say I'm Bob Dylan. Yep. I want to be. Love the guy. Don't understand the guy.
Well, he's been a fundamental part of your life. How can you not be him after watching these films?
Yeah. I don't understand him any more than anyone else does, but when he's good, he's great. And he just seems like he's from another planet. I mean, he's just, he's something else. So, I'm Bob Dylan. Who are you? There's no doctor. Are there doctors?
Well, I having watched these films, I kind of hope I'm not Bob Dylan.
Exactly.
I mean, I thoroughly recognise I am no Nobel laureate. Fair enough, but neither of these films make Bob Dylan look like an awesome stand-up great guy, do they?
Okay.
No doctors in this week's films.
No.
But one bad-tempered nurse, but I didn't feel particularly like him either. I reckon if I'm going to identify with anybody that I've watched on screen this week, it's probably Terry Ellis, who is like the very British-sounding record label founder.
Oh, yeah.
Who talks a complete load of BS with Dylan during Don't Look Back. I think Dylan is working out a song on the piano.
Yeah.
And this guy basically he just sounds like an utter idiot telling him, I'm a scientist and I have very deep thoughts. I am very deep with big thoughts. Because there's this voice at the back of my head which is worried that, you know what, that's what I sound like after 4 beers. So I think, sadly, maybe I am a little bit more like Terry Ellis than I would like to admit.
Yeah.
Interesting, that guy went on to found Chrysalis Records.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, so that guy is actually responsible for quite a lot of the records that I listened to when I was a boy.
Yeah, it wasn't really clear why he was in there. Maybe he was starting to think about a record company at that point, but they talked to him as if he was a student, right?
Yeah, it's a
They
weird
brought him
kind
up
of,
to talk.
get another hanger-on.
Yeah. And it's funny because that's a long conversation. That's probably 5 minutes of the film, I'm guessing. And it's not super interesting. It's not like a deep conversation by any means. And it's in there. It seems like it's in its entirety. I mean, imagine, I bet the actual conversation, if there was one, probably went on 30 or 40 minutes. So
but it's 75% Terry Ellis, who is by far the less interesting person involved in that conversation. Why are we listening to him talk?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
But enigmatic man, that piano player.
Yes.
Well, we've talked about it. We should do it. Mm-hmm. Let's see what we can do our synthesis, draw these two films together. Well, I openly acknowledge you know a lot more about Dylan than I am. I am all ears. You will have something more profound to... Well, this happens every week. You'll have something more profound to say than me, but especially this week, you'll be doubly profound.
Yeah. I don't know. No, actually, I've written very little for a synthesis. For me, the biggest question is what is true and what is not. And I don't think the documentary is any more honest than the narrative film is. And the narrative film is based on a book. And I think they've made it. It's funny because it's probably less dramatic. I love the fact that you were talking about the stakes in A Complete Unknown, and they're artificial. I think that is zeroing in on the will he go electric or not it's convenient, but it's not dramatic, and it's actually not very true either. So that just makes you think like what's real in Bob Dylan's life and what is not, and. He had control of both of these pictures to a certain extent. I mean, I think he kind of had to sign off on A Complete Unknown. He liked it. He read it with Mangold and even made suggestions on dialogue and stuff. And having seen some other Bob Dylan films, maybe it's not a good idea to have him work on it. If you ever, I think it's called Masked and Anonymous, is a film from, must be like early 2000s. I don't recommend it, but it's the same thing with both of these films. I think the music is great. A lot of the bits in between, they become filler bits. And,
yes.
As a result, it changes the film. In both cases, it really changes the film. And I felt like A Complete Unknown had enough music. I would have gone for more, but that's just because I'm a junkie. Whereas Don't Look Back actually doesn't have enough music.
Yeah.
And that's why it's not as strong. And I think it's an hour and a half. I mean, it should be pretty tight and it should be a lovely viewing, but it's not. It's not an easy thing to watch. And in part because... he doesn't come across very well. His team doesn't come across very well. And you're wondering, well, why would you make a film where you don't come off that well? And so you wonder, like, to what extent Pennybaker? I mean, it's hard to really get a sense of what he did. Otherwise, is it just cinema verite where he's shooting all these things and turning it into a documentary? So who's in on the joke, I guess, with Bob Dylan is that comes to me in both films. But his relationships with people, I think it's a struggle for him in general. But the Joan Baez in A Complete Unknown, I mean, Monica Barbaro does a fantastic job She's magnetic, and she really shows what Joan Baez could do for his music and how she inspired him. In Don't Look Back, she's really just kind of in the background all the time, and I don't remember exactly. I don't think they performed together in Don't Look Back.
Don't think so. No, only part. She just sings a little bit. Backstage, doesn't she?
And I didn't think I would ever say this. Maybe that film needed more Joan Baez. People don't say that. But that's where that film took me mentally. It's like I want to hear what the real Joan Baez Bob Dylan collaboration was like, and I would direct people towards No Direction Home, which is I think that's probably Scorsese also. I think that's this. Yeah, I think Scorsese made both documentaries on Dylan there. So I would direct people to that. I think that's a bit more interactive with Bob, so you get more of his musings on his own life. But again, I don't think he's that trustworthy. I don't think he wants to be, and I think it's intentional. I think because again, life can be pretty boring. So I never thought that I'd talk about so much existentialism with these two films, but that's what these films are for me. So I think they're both worth watching. I think it was a good pair. It's good to get that. There were other things we could have watched, I think, in hindsight, like Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, which Dylan's in. He acts in, he does the music for. I think that would have been an interesting watch. So there's plenty of Dylan material out there, and I think it's like just listening to his music this last month. A lot of it is amazing, and it'll just make you go wild, and then a lot of it is subpar, but you gotta do both. I mean, the reason he's great is because he's done so much and he's experimented so much, and I think that's ultimately the lesson of A Complete Unknown, is that he's got to be liberated to do what he wants to do, and sometimes he's gonna make absolute crap, but very often, or just as often, he's gonna make masterpieces.
As usual, your synthesis considerably more sophisticated than mine. I wrote down, I think both films suggest that fame makes an ass of you. That's what I wrote. or at least it does of Bob Dylan, anyway. But then maybe he was just an ass anyway.
I think to a certain extent, I think a lovable ass. I mean, I think he's done some good.
Mercurial.
Yeah, I mean, some of the moments that I loved the most were early Dylan, because he gets a little quieter, but he was very much into civil rights in the 60s, and some of those songs are very political. You think of Masters of War, Times They Are, Changin, Blowin' in the Wind even. He's much more politically engaged and active in that part of his career. And some of those songs are great. I think the best moment in Don't Look Back for me is this, it's actually another filmmaker down south. He's playing at people are registering to vote. These are field workers in the American South somewhere. And he's singing about Medgar Evers, a political tune, the old school, like Woody Guthrie acoustic guitar, and a guy with a harmonica just out in the field somewhere. And it's a really, it's archival, it's a real piece of history. And I think that's a powerful moment. And you get some of that, I think, in A Complete Unknown as well. Those coffee house scenes in Greenwich Village are great because they just take you right there. But also it shows a different side of Bob Dylan, the early political side. I mean,
I think the other big takeaway from watching these films back to back is that their highlights are clear. For both of these films, the highlights are some of the finest songs ever written.
Yep.
I kind of think that's enough, isn't it?
It is.
You know Bob Dylan vastly better than I do, so I feel like I'm coming to this almost as a newcomer. And these songs, they're pretty remarkable. They seem so simple from the outside. It's just a few chords. The way he sings, there's barely a melody sometimes. The rhymes, they after you've heard them, they seem so obvious. It like these songs that they feel like it feels like the song has just written itself. Like some of these songs are so good that they are like a part of the fabric of the universe. They've just precipitated out of the place and the time where we live.
Yeah.
They're almost like they are too fundamental to have possibly been written by a human being.
Yeah. Yes.
I think some of these songs are just absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
And I can utterly understand why that sort of rather on the nose, but I guess thoroughly necessary dialogue about how people ask, where do the songs come from?
Yep.
But what they really mean is, why didn't the song come to me? These songs seem so simple that people say, why didn't I think of that? It's so obvious after you've heard it.
Yeah.
And yet, well, that is what I don't use this word very often, and it's considerably overused, but genius, I think. Those Nobel Prizes, they don't give them out to anybody,
Yeah.
I remember when I first heard that Bob Dylan was going to get the Nobel Prize, I was a little bit quizzical about the whole thing. Yeah. But now you realise, oh my goodness, yes, these are these songs are pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
My synthesis this week is Bob Dylan. Where have you been all my life?
Yeah.
I was listening to Subterranean Homesick Blues. While preparing dinner tonight. So just as dinner was ready, that came over my headphones, and I thought, everyone's got to listen to this. So I put it on the speaker and turned it up so that everybody in the house could listen to it.
Yeah.
And when the children came down to eat dinner, and I said, so have you ever heard of Bob Dylan? And my daughter looked at me and she said, yes, you never stopped going on about him. Because that's sort of all I've talked about this week. I think that's kind of my take home from watching these two films. Bloody hell, Bob Dylan. Blimey.
Yeah.
I've got one question for you, though.
Sure.
And this is another very film schooly type question. Who for the new film, who is this film for, do you think?
Ooh, great question.
I mean, the people who would have bought Bob Dylan's, the people who would have bought Highway 61 Revisited, are probably too old to go to the movies very much now. I don't think they are the people buying the tickets. We went to the local Odeon and I didn't spot anybody over 75 in the audience. I don't think the film is for people who listened to Dylan when he was around playing the music that we see in the film. So who is it for?
I think to a certain extent it is for Dylan fans, for sure. It's got you listening to the back catalog. I've been doing it all week long, or all 4 weeks long. I think it's for Americans, though, to a certain extent. I think we're looking for some meaning over here. And it's great that it focuses on his more revolutionary and political side from the early 60s. I
love that scene where he's playing Woody Guthrie's guitar and it has that "This Machine Kills Fascists" sticker on it.
Exactly.
I was glad to see that.
So I think there is a political undercurrent to this film, and it makes sense for this time, I think. Tunes like Masters of War and Times Are Changin', which I think appear in both films, but certainly in Complete Unknown. I think the thing about Dylan is that I think we all want to know more about him, and we're never going to know that much more, I don't think. And he's just one of our own. It seems like he's an extraterrestrial, though. The way that he can produce that much music and just hammer stuff out and tour endlessly. He just seems like he's from another planet, but he's just a Midwestern guy, He's from Minnesota. I think he still lives in Minnesota. I'm not sure where he spends most of his time, but he's one of us. He's an American original. And he's just so influential, even if we don't think he's influential in our lives. He's written so many of those great songs, as you mentioned, that you didn't even know he'd written. So I think it's for people over here right now. And I think it's a masterstroke to try and introduce him to the next generation, because I think there's just, so much junk out there right now, and I think there's not a whole lot of meaning. There's not a lot of complexity to lyrics on that level. I mean, he's a poet, and that's why he wins the Nobel Prize. I think a lot, and particularly for some of his earlier work. But I think we need more of that. And there's this one scene actually in Don't Look Back. I think he's doing "It's All Right, Ma," and he's basically rapping. He's this bridge character, and I think he does bring a lot of people together just because he's so talented, and he's really worked in, as I said earlier, gospel and blues and rock and roll and folk music, and a lot of those lyrics, he's rapping in the early 60s to get his messages out there. So I think it is, it's a film for this time. I know it doesn't seem that way on the surface because everything that happens is 60 years old or so and more. But I think it does resonate with all Americans somehow. And that's why I'm very curious to know. I was asking you earlier, I think, about, is he as big in the UK, or do the Brits understand him the way we don't understand him. And I think so. It's very often, you want what you can't understand, or you want to know death on some level, and you want to know these mysteries. And I think Bob Dylan will always be a mystery for us. So I think it's definitely made for the fans, but I think it's made for all Americans right now.
Yes, that's a true, profound, sad. Yeah. Well, on that happy note.
Ooh, yeah.
Before I pick up my "This Machine Kills Fascists" guitar, we have just got time to talk about what else has been playing at this theatre.
I'm curious to know what is in your theatre.
Well, this week we actually went to see a proper film. We went to see Conclave, which is the Ralph Fiennes picture about. So it's all about the campaign to elect a new pope. Yeah. So it's directed by Edvard Berger, who directed All Quiet on the Western Front.
Oh yeah,
which we enjoyed a couple of years ago.
We did.
Written by Peter Strawn. Based on a book by Robert Harris, weirdly, which doesn't feature any Nazis. There can't be many Robert Harris books which don't feature any Nazis, but this is one of them. And it was very okay.
Oh.
There's stuff to enjoy. I did enjoy the look of it. Yeah. I tell you what I really enjoyed was watching Ralph Fiennes dress up as a priest.
Yeah.
The film is basically packed full of men of a certain age having an absolutely great time dressing up as priests.
Huh. Not his first time, I don't think. I think he's dressed up as a priest before.
He wears the costume well. I mean, I love those kind of Vatican costumes. Yeah. The fabric and the shapes. I think they look great. I can really see the appeal. So the film looks good, and I do enjoy watching Ralph Fiennes do almost anything. But it does suffer from that classic screenwriting type problem where more or less nothing happens. Or at least, I mean, you will find this difficult to believe. Could you believe that during the election of a new pope, there might be a bit of politicking and people trying to discredit each other and ruin each other's reputation? And basically that's it. Sorry, spoilers for anyone who was going to go and see it, but that is it. And I was just assuming the film kind of early on it alludes to a kind of sex abuse scandal, but never ever really goes there. This is a film that really needs a conspiracy. It needs a big secret. It needs a murder or something like that, and there just isn't one. There's a bunch of sort of middle-aged men trying to ruin each other's reputations, and that's it. So a bit of an anticlimax. Looks great. Could do with a story. What have you seen this week?
I've seen 2 films.
Oh, you've been busy.
One on 16 millimeter at my good friends over at Kinonic, 12 Angry Men.
Fantastic. My God, yes.
Yeah, what a cast, what a film. Just great. And also very, very relevant for today. I mean, there's definitely a lot of undercurrents of racism and prejudice throughout it. And but again, like a proper debate, fantastic filmmaking from, I think it's Sidney Lumet's first feature film. I think he'd done television before that. Really smart feature film.
Imagine starting with that. Oh my God.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's amazing. I mean, again, a play should not be a great film, but it works, and it's it's classic first feature director material because it's one space basically. There's a little courtroom scene and then a little courthouse stairs scene, but most of it's one room. Just fantastically photographed, and just a huge cast of great actors and. Go see that if you haven't seen it. If you can see it on 16 millimeter with all the cigarette burns and the jamming reels and the poor sound, and try and see it. I saw at the Museum of Art here a Danish film, one of these massive European co-productions. So a lot of people were involved, but it's called The Girl with the Needle. I don't know if that's appeared in England at all.
Not that I have seen, no.
Fantastic. If we could, I'd love to do it on the pod at some point. I don't know if it's going to show. It'll probably be on, it's not streaming here yet, but so we saw it in the museum.
So this is a vaccine film, yes?
To a certain extent, yeah. There are a lot of...
that was supposed to be a joke. No.
There are a number of needle metaphors and needle uses, I will say, It is
Okay.
a beautiful, it's black and white, sort of what, I think they talk about at the end of the World War I, so 1918, something like that, talk about the Great War coming to a close. So it's very industrial. It's about a garment maker, and it's a lot more than that. The thing about this film is it constantly surprises. So it wrong foots you a lot. There are a lot of subtle little details you have to pick up on, and then you're always guessing. I was shocked how much I liked this film. I thought it was really, really well done. So look out for that. The Girl with the Needle.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, on the list it goes.
Yes.
On Instagram. Are we still? See, I'm worried that we shouldn't really be on Instagram anymore.
Why?
We might have to find a new home. I don't know.
The meta thing, you mean? Or?
Yeah. So on Instagram, currently, we are still at Two Real Cinema Club. You can read the blog. That's pretty neutral, which is tworealcinemaclub.com. WordPress hasn't gone all right wing yet. Oh, no. Comment on our YouTube channel or email us at tworealcinemaclub@gmail.com. Next time.
Are we still on YouTube? We haven't been kicked off entirely then.
We're clinging on by our fingernails. Yes, just waiting to be censored and struck off any minute now. Next time, it's Return of Jesse Eisenberg.
It is. We're watching A Real Pain, right? With Kieran Culkin and Jesse Eisenberg, I think, wrote, directed, acts in the film.
Very exciting.
We're seeing it with...
one of my personal favourites. It's a Rossellini picture, Journey to Italy, or Voyage to Italy. I feel it should be called Viaggio in Italia, I think it is.
Okay.
As always, I will defer to your immensely better European pronunciation. But Ingrid Bergman in a Italian classic. A truly fine film. Looking forward to seeing that again. Next week, we've got a quiz. Join us at the Popcorn Counter for our quarterly movie quiz. And then back for A Real Pain in 2 weeks' time. Thanks for joining us, as always. And we will see you next time.
See you on the road. 2 journey films. We're traveling together. Bye, everyone.
Bye.